Hello. 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 So yes, I'm Graham. This is Mark. Mark is the former multi-blind world record holder. He beat the legendary 41 out of 41 by Moscow Kowalczyk. He's also multi-blind national champion for the last 2 years. I don't have nearly as many titles, but I'm working on it. And one thing we always get asked is how we do it, basically, in multiple blindfolded. It's kind of like a mystery to the layman, and we don't really think it's as hard as you think it is, and we want to help explain why. So yeah.
Okay, so basically we're assuming if you want to get a lot out of this, that you know how to do 3-blind, how to memo 3-blind, because there's not really enough time to go into it here, but there are a lot of great tutorials online. Basically, the concept is to have a letter scheme like you see there, so all the pieces lettered, and then you trace the cube, you trace where the pieces have to go, and memorize those letters. So when you start your first multi-blind, some people might do 1 word per letter and things like that, or just like memo the words one at a time, which is very difficult. But very soon you should start thinking about making pairs. So we have a few examples there of how you can take 2 letter pairs and just come up with a word that's kind of obvious for that pair, or something that's not related to the pair, as long as you can remember it and have some kind of connection.
So yeah, basically the first thing most people think when they're going to approach memorizing a Rubik's Cube, they'd think we're just going to try to memorize a string of letters, brute force, like take F, P, M, N, E, A, B, and then just like say that in your head a million times until you remember it forever. But that's really difficult, totally not practical when you're trying to get like multiple cubes, like up to 4. I remember when I was trying to do that, 4 felt basically impossible. And one thing you can do past that, so you're not just brute force memorizing everything, use letter pairs. So the example we have here, IE is ice, VE is Venus, ML is mall. Basically just come up with whatever word you think represents that letter pair the best for you. And then you have a string of words, which basically cuts the memorization in half for you. And if you want to make it even easier on yourself, use your imagination, try to come up with a story that uses all those words in that right order. So in this case, it would be finding ice on Venus, and then you made a mall that sells bags of honey to people reading magazines, yada, yada, yada. It's always going to be really absurd, and the thing that we found is that the more absurd, the better. And I think you'll find the same thing. Mark?
Okay. So then the question comes, like, you're not just going to remember all these sentences just in order for a multi-blind. So basically, you can when you're starting out, and that's what I did actually, and that's 2014, not at the competition, but in the hotel room. I tried my first 2-cube multi-blind, and I just did it that way, just trying to memo the order of the sentences. But once you start to add more cubes, you want to use this method called the Method of Loci, which we're going to do an interactive demonstration of very soon, but it allows you to memo large amounts of information. It's really amazing how effective it is.
Yeah, I remember when I first discovered this method, and I think, like I said, 4 cubes was super difficult for me, and I couldn't do it just brute force memorizing the letters. And when I tried the Method of Loci, I immediately did it first try, and then I did 7 out of 7 on my next attempt. And I was like mind blown how well this method works. And it's used all across memory sports. Memory sports, if you haven't heard of it, basically consists of just people trying to memorize large quantities of random data as fast as they possibly can. And it's actually, from what I've heard, an even bigger community than the speed cubing community, believe it or not, because it's worldwide and it's been around longer than speed cubing. But basically, it's an ancient method, I think was like invented in ancient Greece, and basically, yeah, like I said, people use it to memorize, like, you shuffle a deck of cards, fold through it super quick, try to commit that shuffle to memory, and then like lay it out. Things like that, memorizing strings of digits. A lot of people use the method of loci to memorize like thousands of digits of pi, to each their own. Yeah, so Mark's gonna walk you through how it actually works.
Okay, so basically the idea is to have locations that you imagine in your mind, so just places, preferably that you know well, and you take those senses, like the one that Graham explained earlier about, it was so weird, I don't remember what it was. But you take those absurd things that are happening in your stories, and you imagine them happening in these places in your mind, and you have those places in a set order. And so to recall the information that you're trying to memorize, you just go through those locations in that order, and you'll hopefully be able to recall the stories that happen there, because the human mind is really good at doing that. It's really good at remembering where things were and placing things, spatial reasoning, like placing things next to each other like that.
Okay, so basically, yeah, the main way we're going to do it for multi-blind, it kind of varies with the things you're trying to memorize, but we basically are going to put like a handful of letter pairs in one location, and then the next handful of letter pairs in the next location, and then the remainder in the next location. And that's how I do it for one cube, but we're going to show you this now. So yeah, as we said before, we think the magic of this method is really just apparent when you're doing it yourself, so we're going to try to get the audience. I mean, we can't tell you how to live your lives, but follow along if you want to try to memorize 20 letters with us right now. I don't think it's as hard as you will expect it to be. So we should just do that right now. We don't have a slide for that. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to use this venue as the example. I kept saying loci. I just learned that it's actually loci instead of loci, sorry. Our first loci is going to be that back corner of the venue right by the exit over there. So visualize that. You don't really even need to visualize it. Just remember what that looks like. How does that exit make you feel? Sad because you're leaving this place? I don't know. So the first three letter pairs are, yeah. Okay. I can't memorize it for stupid reason. Yeah, we just came up with this. So the first letter pair is JY, and we decided for JY to use J McNeil because we thought, people here would know that. So JY represents Jade McNeil. That's the first letter of the image over there. The next two letters are going to be FX, and I also just realized that probably a lot of people in here don't know what a fax machine is, but it's like an old school email. And so, yeah, J McNeil is faxing something. That's FX, so JYFX. And then the next two letters are Q and B. And we're going to use cube for this. We know that there's no Q in cube, but this is an example of how for weird letter pairs like QB, you don't have to actually use a word that contains those letters as long as you know what as long as you know what that word represents. In this case, cube represents QB, then it should work. You just have to do like a little more memorization. So yeah, right over there by the exit, Jane McNeil is faxing a cube. And so just imagine him doing that over there. Mark will tell you the next one.
Okay, so the next letter pairs we had were WV, BD, ND. So for WV, I use the word wave. So since this is the first one, by the way, we're going to use this location up here, like the stage with the tables and the timer stations, and like this screen, just this whole area here. So for WV, I use wave. Since it's the first one, I would use like the object like a wave of water. It's easier to start your senses with objects if you can, because they can be like doing something or interacting with the next thing. So wave, and then BD is just a bed. So picture a wave hitting a bed. You can think of like maybe one of these tables like transforming into a bed because it's sort of similar in shape. And the next one, ND, would just be needles. So we had needles falling out of the bed. So just picture when the wave hits it, needles fall out all over this area. Think of it like as vividly as you can, the sound of the needles hitting the hard floor if you want to make it stick as well as possible.
I forgot the first letter pair of the next one again. What was it?
KQ.
KQ. Oh, kick. Okay. Sorry. This is why he's the national champion, not me. Okay, so the third location is going to be over there where we're doing the mental block streaming. So a little gated off area where all the cool staff hangs out. Hey, Andrew. And so the first letter pair over there is going to be KQ. There's another example of a word not containing both of the letters. We're going to use kick for KQ. And then the next letter pair, or the next letter pair was GI, right? For GI, I use GI Joe. I don't know if anybody here knows GI Joe. Great show. So someone is kicking, if there's a verb in the beginning of your image, it's kind of hard to like image just an imaginary person kicking GI Joe. So I always just default to myself kicking GI Joe. You guys can picture yourselves kicking GI Joe. That'll probably be a little bit more memorable. So you are kicking GI Joe, and then the next letter pair is CX, and that is going to be Chex Mix, the cereal. So you kick GI Joe, and Chex Mix falls on Walker Welch, which is WC. So, hey, he's over there. Perfect. Walker, everybody. So just picture yourself kicking GI Joe. So KQ, GI, Chex Mix, CX, falls on Walker Welch, WC. So I think we should do a quick review, which is a good example of what you would actually do in a multi-blind. You always want to review systematically. So over there, I think you guys could probably remember what is over there, but we've got Jada McNeil faxing a cube. That was JYFXQB. Yeah. And then right here,
I have a wave hitting a bed and needles falling out, WV, BD, ND.
and then I think you guys will remember the one we did 5 seconds ago. You are kicking KQ, GI Joe, GI, Chex Mix, CX falls on Walker Welch, WC. And we're going to come back to that at the end of this presentation and see if you still remember it. And I'm betting that you'll all remember it like tomorrow morning even, and that's how good this method works. Is this you?
Okay, so if you want to apply this to multi-blind, you'll want to have a set system beforehand. You don't want to, some people use like the locations around them sometimes, but basically it's a good idea to have your own memory system. So basically for creating your memory palace, that's what these locations are called when you have a bunch of these locations in order. That's your memory palace. To create one, just take locations that you, preferably that you know well, but basically anything you can imagine in your mind and has some kind of details to relate to your images, and sort of memorize them in an order that's logical to use. So what a lot of people do is they take their house and they do like some kind of a logical like path through their house that the locations are along. So that's how you would create a memory palace. You can take any places you know. And then for the words you're going to use for your letter pairs, you could come up with them on the spot for your first attempts. But as you're practicing, you should definitely consider making some kind of a list, even if it's just a mental list. That's what I did for a long time. But now I'm trying to improve my list with like an actual spreadsheet of letter pairs. And it might seem like a lot to have a word for every single one, but it's really a lot easier than it seems. And it's definitely a good idea to have something prepared for each letter pair. It saves a lot of time.
Yeah, that's all for that slide. Okay, so yeah, this is just like mentioning some problems you may have with letter pairs. So basically, when people are doing their first multis, they might notice that they are DNFing random cubes by like 3 pieces maybe. And I think a lot of the time when you're a beginner, that's from doing things like recalling one letter pair instead of another one because they're too similar. And so like doing what Mark suggested before is really helpful to avoid that. So like, I can't think of an example right now, but if you have 2 letter pairs that are similar, you can like weed that out of a spreadsheet and make sure you don't have anything that's too similar so that you would recall the wrong thing during a multi-blind, because recalling that one thing is going to cause you 1 DNF and you don't want that. And yeah, so I think like one of the main reasons the method of loci works so well is because you're using places that you have like specific emotions in your brain attached to each location that you know really well, that you're using in your memory palace. And so that makes it really easy for your brain to like recall the things that are happening in those locations. And likewise, if you use letter pairs that are like things that you know, like your friends and, I don't know, your dad, your Game Boy. Nobody knows about Game Boy anymore, probably. Okay, things like that. Things that you have an actual emotion tied to in your brain, those are gonna work so much more than, I don't know, basic inanimate objects, in my opinion. So that's why you should really try to come up with a letter pair list yourself and go through it really systematically. And another thing, when you start making a spreadsheet like that, at a certain level, it starts to become really useful if you have multiple options per letter pair, because one thing you'll find when you're trying to do multi-blind is just in the plethora of options that you can get with like all the different possible letter pairs, sometimes it's really hard to come up with a sentence that makes any sense. So if you have multiple options for each letter pair, you have way more stuff at your disposal to use and make a sentence that actually like works in your brain.
So now we mentioned a little bit review, like when we did our demonstration, like we reviewed each of the locations again, and that's going to be really important. It's really, I think even when you're starting out, you have to review some. At first you might just like review over and over until it feels comfortable, but pretty soon you want a system, because that definitely saves time and makes your attempts more consistent if you actually have a set number of times you review every time. So the review I do, I'm not going to get into like the whole thing, but like I'll memo 2 cubes quickly and then I'll quickly review those 2 cubes right away. I do that 4 times. I review that group of 8 and I do larger reviews. That's basically, I got that from Mascow, who was former world record holder, had the famous 41 out of 41. Graham, do you want to talk about your review then?
So yeah, this whole review system thing is, I think, one of the most important things we'll probably talk about, at least if you're trying to actually get like into 20 or more cubes. This was one of the best pieces of advice I got from somebody, was basically just, I think I was just coming up with random review systems when I was trying 20 or so cubes a couple years ago, and I was doing weird things that were like favoring some cubes, and like I had less review on other cubes, and I didn't even realize it because I didn't actually sit down and try to like figure out a logical review system, like Mark was just saying. Like he does 1, 2, 1, 2, repeats for 4 packs of 2, does those 8, repeats that for more packs of 8, and then he reviews like an entire 16, I think. And it's really systematic like that, so you don't favor anything. But there's also like varying review systems that like I use. I basically just one pass 8 cubes. I'll do memorize 1 through 8 and then review 1 through 8. I repeat that for packs of 8 until I'm done with 32, and then I review 32 again, and then I do like a short term for like the rest of however many I'm trying at that certain time. And that's like also unique. I don't think any other top multi-blinders use that. And Shivam Bansal, who just got the legendary 48 out of 48, which is one of the most insane world records I've heard of in a while, he will just do memo 1 through 8, memo 1 through 8, memo 1 through 8, all the way up to 40, and then review 40, and then he'll really short term the last 8. And that's also different from what I was doing. And everybody has different systems. Basically, the moral of the story is just like, try a bunch of different things while you're trying to improve. It may seem like you're risking wasting an hour, but in the long term, figuring out what review system works best for you is super important. And I'm still revising my review systems as I go on. And I know Shivam Bansal is like trying to move on to just being able to memo 1 through 40, review 1 through 40. That's like his next level scheme, so he can get 60 cubes in under an hour. And yeah, things like that.
Okay, so another thing that a lot of top multi-blinders do differently is visualizing or not visualizing. So some people have a really easy time like visualizing things in their head very vividly, and some people like me really can't see those images in their head at all and are really just like thinking conceptually about what's going on in the memo. So I'm sure like some of you, when we were going over the 20 letters that we memorized, some people probably pictured those things really vividly, and some people probably just kind of heard and like thought about what was going on. So there's a lot of arguments like for and against visualizing. Basically, some people think, like Shivam Bansal visualizes a lot, and like he's told me he thinks that it improves the strength of the memo, which would obviously like save you time in your reviews. Your reviews would go faster if you can recall that faster, and just overall makes the attempt more consistent and stuff, more accurate. But I would argue, like for me, it seems longer to visualize something. So there's a lot of arguments kind of for and against, and that visualizing might not be necessary. I don't think we really know for sure which is better. Graham also is like transitioning to visualizing less and less. So really this is another one that's like, be open to trying new things, like do whatever works best for you. If you can't really visualize things, don't worry about it. But if it's easier for you to, and it makes you memorize things more strongly, then definitely do it.
And then the last thing we're going to talk about is various ways to practice, ways to improve. So the first thing, I know Mark and I film every single attempt that we do at home, in competition, everything. If you have like an iPhone with enough storage on it, you can just set it up right next to your desk, film your entire solve, and then you can go back and figure out the reasons for every single DNF that you got. And this is super, super important, because if you don't do this, you may just be making the same mistakes over and over and over again, and you'll never get better accuracy as you start trying more cubes. And so, like we said before, identifying bad letter pairs, that's another great way to practice. Fix all your letter pairs. I have a friend out in the audience right now who pretty much spent the entire last year coming up with a person action object list, which is just a system that a lot of memory athletes use, which basically coming up with all of your images being person doing an action on an object. And so he has a person and an action and an object for every possible letter pair. So you can imagine how long that must have taken to come up with and commit it all to memory. A lot of people think that's a good system to use. I'm not entirely convinced that it's good for multi-blind, but for other memory sports, maybe. I don't know so well. But yeah, other mistakes you find while you're identifying all your DNFs, sometimes you're messing up commutators. It's like 3-style commutators. If you don't know, you can look it up because it's too hard to explain right now, but you may be doing inverse of commutators all the time and not know it. You may just like not know the direction of the comm you're doing and just do it wrong every single time you get that case. You can also identify the rooms in your memory palace that you're DNFing in the most. And that may tell you that these rooms are actually not constructed very well, and you may want to like later imagine different places in the rooms that are easier to visualize for you and put images in. Oh yeah, a little plus side to filming all your solves, you can figure out how many cubes you solved over the hour if you go over the hour. So if you ever want to like calculate what score you would get in the WCA. And so yeah, going over time, transitioning to that, there's nothing wrong with that, especially in practice. I think one thing that a lot of people do when they're trying to improve, maybe you can do like 20 cubes in 55 minutes and with like decent accuracy, and you just want to like, you really badly want to get that 20 out of 20, but getting a perfect attempt like that is so difficult and frustrating that I really recommend you just don't do it. Just go for 25 cubes. It may be like an hour and 10 minutes, but you're gonna start, like, just lay out everything you have to do in your review system in order to push that down to 1 hour, and just like push yourself. If you ever stop pushing yourself, you're basically just like practicing drilling comms, and you're not gonna get your memorization speed any better. You wanna do the last part?
Yeah, we have one more slide, right?
I don't think so.
I thought we did.
Oh, we do, okay. Well,
Nathan was telling me we only have like 2 more minutes.
okay, so we got to rush through this last part because we've been going a little long. And accuracy versus speed. So I guess, yeah, if you're pushing yourself to sub-hour on a lot of cubes, you're gonna really take a hit in accuracy. You may be getting like, I don't know, 18 out of 25, and it feels pretty bad, but as you get more comfortable with that number of cubes, your brain's gonna like build endurance for it, and it's not gonna tire you out as much. You're not gonna make as many stupid little mistakes. And yeah, all that matters, in my opinion, is that you're improving, so yeah.
Okay, so the last one we had is basically just how much do multi-blinders practice. So I'm just gonna go through this really quick. A lot of top multi-blinders do about like 4 to 7 multi-blinds a week, which is really not a lot for like compared to other things that people get world class at. So there's a lot of other things you can do to practice other than doing an attempt, because doing an attempt takes a lot of focus. It takes an hour of focus and preparation to scramble the cubes and all that. So you can like do 3-blind practice. You can do just hand scrambles and like memo the cube and execute it and just do that over and over. Like I find I can do that while like listening to music or a podcast or whatever. So that's like a lot less focus required than doing a multi-blind attempt. That's kind of like similar to 3x3 solvers doing like untimed 3x3 practice. And analyzing attempts and working on your letter pairs, like those kind of things outside the attempts are also really helpful. And that counts as practice for sure. So.
And one thing I want to mention just about doing that many attempts per week, I think when I started doing a lot of attempts like that, I found issues with, I think you'll find that the method of loci works so well that you actually start to remember things too much. And if you want to do an attempt in the same rooms that you used for an attempt like 2 days before, you're still going to remember those letter pairs you memorized in that memory palace, and it's going to interfere with your attempt and make it more difficult. In my opinion, this actually doesn't happen to Mark because he doesn't visualize as much. I think at least that's why it doesn't happen, but it really interferes with my attempts. So because I wanted to practice like every other day when I'm preparing for a competition, I made multiple memory palaces. So at this point, I actually have like 150 rooms split into 3 different memory palaces. And people are always asking me like, how do you come up with 150 rooms? But you basically just have to be like creative, realize that they don't have to be just strictly speaking rooms. They can be just paths that you know, like on the street. They can be video games. I used the game Skyrim for like 36 rooms, and it works perfectly fine. And once you have all these rooms, you can practice as much as you want and not have that issue. And I think that's basically it. Yeah.
Try to recall the demonstration memo we did later. Like tomorrow morning, you might still even remember it, but definitely now you can probably most of you remember it. So.
Yeah, I think you will. Okay, that's it.